Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today for the second in a series of Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative webinars. Today's webinar will examine how states are moving toward career readiness goals. We'd like to thank the National Association of Home Builders for their support of today's webinar. I'm Lauren Danino, Policy Advisor at the Western Governors Association, and before I introduce our moderator and panelists, I'd like to describe the Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative and go over a few logistical details for the webinar. The Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative is the major policy effort of current Chair Governor Dennis Daugaard of South Dakota. The initiative is bringing together policymakers, educators, business leaders, and others working in workforce development to bridge the gap between prospective workers and employers in the West, and to provide a framework for states and stakeholders to share best practices in workforce development. The initiative kicked off this fall with a series of 4 workshops held in South Dakota, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Washington. At the workshops, governors and participants alike emphasized the growing need to increase career readiness in schools. Today's webinar will take a deeper look at the steps that states are taking to reach that goal. We have an excellent panel today we're thrilled to have. First is our moderator, Jennifer Zinth. Jennifer leads Education Commission of the state's work on high school and STEM. She conducts research and analysis and counsels states on numerous issues related to career readiness, including CTE and work-based learning, graduation requirements and high school assessments, college and career advising, dual enrollment, advanced placement, and early college models, to name just a few. Joining Jennifer, we have 4 panelists, the first of which is Dr. Sarah Heath, who has worked in career and technical education her whole career as a high school business and computer science teacher, state program director, local system administrator, and now as the state director of CTE in Colorado. In her current positions, she supports all secondary and post-secondary CTE programs in the state, as well as the Department of Corrections, with their CTE program in leadership. We also have Dr. Dawn Burns, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Career Readiness in Nevada. She oversees the New Skills for Youth Initiative Phase 2, awarded to 10 states by JPMorgan Chase. Previously, Dr. Burns was the Assistant Director for Career Technical Education Programs in the Clark County School District in Las Vegas, Nevada. Nathan Kubicek is the Talent Development Director for Crossland Construction Company. Nathan partners with chief officers in the company to develop and engage high-performing and high-potential construction professionals. Nathan has spent more than a decade in learning and development roles within the commercial construction and manufacturing industries. And finally, Kathryn Zekus. Kathryn oversees Advanced CTE's federal policy strategy, leading efforts to ensure Advanced CTE's priorities are represented in federal policies, and all members are informed and supported through any policy changes. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists and moderator for joining us today, and we'll go over a couple logistics before we dive in. Each of our panelists will be delivering opening remarks. Following those remarks, Jennifer will ask a few questions of the panelists to begin discussion, and we'd like to encourage you all to submit questions for question and answer sessions throughout the moderator discussion period. And with a little more information on that, here's Kevin Moss.
Hi everyone, this is Kevin Moss with the Western Governors Association. You'll see my name up on the panelist bar. Then if you look a little bit higher, you'll see the chat box function. You want to click that so that it's blue and enabled. And at any point during the webinar, you can use the chat box to submit questions to me that you'd like Jennifer to ask during the audience Q&A. And I'll receive those questions and forward them to Jennifer. All right, thank you very much.
Great. Also, please note we'll have a recording of this webinar available after we conclude here today. So I'll be sharing a link for that after today's webinar. With that being said, I would like to hand things over to our moderator, Jennifer.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar. Before I dive into my content with some framing ideas and questions for today, I just want to provide a quick introduction for anyone on the webinar who may not be familiar with Education Commission of the State. So as you can see from the slide here, we're an organization that doesn't focus just on one slice of the education spectrum, but we look at education policies from the earliest grades through post-secondary in the workforce. And we believe in the power of learning from experience. We provide unbiased information and opportunities for collaboration. We don't take sides on issues, but we provide information and research to help policymakers make informed decisions. And we do this in several ways. I'll be touching in a moment on some research and reports that will be coming out later in 2018 that relate to career readiness. We also counsel states. We provide testimonies, presentation and so on to various state entities, task forces, legislative committees, state boards of education, and so forth. And we convene. We have a big summer meeting coming up June 27th to 29th, where career readiness will definitely be front and center. We also have a smaller winter convening every year, but frankly, the most frequent type of convening we do is connecting people across states. Oftentimes I get questions saying, do you know anyone in named states who's working on named issue? And sometimes I do, and I can connect those people directly. And so it's a great opportunity for people to learn across state lines and not reinvent the wheel 50 times over. So starting off here, just providing some overarching content here. In 2013, we witnessed a huge spike in state policymaking around CTE that has continued to the present day. What's interesting is it's not just a significant increase in the number of bills being passed, but also, and importantly, the breadth and depth of policy changes states are undertaking to make sure CTE programs are better funded, engage business and industry at the state and local level in program enhancements, and are aligned with post-secondary programs of study and workforce needs. And while we're not quote-unquote there yet, it's clear that progress has been made in all of these areas and more, and this will be hearing about today. So back in 2014, identified 10 areas of interrelated state policy components to ensure that secondary level CTE programs put students on a trajectory to in-demand skilled careers. And today I'll touch on just 4 of those 10 policy components: CTE Dual Enrollment, and a related element, what we're calling for the moment differentiated dual enrollment, work-based learning, high school graduation requirements, and improving college and career counseling. For each component, I'll briefly identify key questions or policy components states need to consider. Our speakers today will be doing a deeper dive on policies supporting one or more of these components in their state. And in Q&A, I'm happy to discuss further what additional states are doing. So looking first at CTE dual enrollment. In states generally, far more students are enrolled in general academic dual enrollment than CTE dual enrollment coursework. So why is that when research tells us that CTE dual enrollment can be a significant driver for post-secondary participation success, particularly for male and low-income students? A number of major barriers keep CTE dual enrollment course enrollments down. These barriers include securing qualified instructors, for some courses, facilities and equipment, student participation costs. Tuition can be a big one, but course materials and fees can be substantial costs for some CTE dual enrollment courses, student eligibility requirements, and branding/marketing. And it's not readily apparent that a single state CTE dual enrollment policy has managed to solve all of these problems, but rather different states have found solutions to one or more of these challenges. For example, some states have successfully tapped industry professionals as adjuncts to teach dual enrollment courses in high-demand fields, while other states have made major investments to reduce or eliminate tuition and other participation costs. I'll have a brief coming out later this year on CTE dual enrollment policy levers, identifying state solutions to each of these challenges. And currently, the majority of dual enrollment course offerings are geared to more academically oriented, high-achieving students. But this term differentiated dual enrollment, a term my colleague Elizabeth Barnett at Teachers College, Columbia University has come up with, describes dual enrollment options for a wider range of learners. As you can see from this matrix, these options may include CTE dual enrollment, or career pathways, career academies for higher and middle achieving students, and also activities for lower achieving students such as student success or college ready courses, aka Freshman 101, summer bridge programs, college brush-up programs for placement tests, or on-campus experiences such as campus tours, use of on-campus labs, and so forth. Some career pathway courses and pre-collegiate experiences may not confer post-secondary credit, but at least give students a taste of college and hopefully inspire and motivate them to enroll in post-secondary after high school graduation. For the most part, states don't have policies in place supporting differentiated dual enrollment or other pre-collegiate experiences. So for now, these types of experiences are offered by individual innovative institutions. However, states could adopt policies to provide structures and dedicated funding streams for these programs. Elizabeth and I will have a brief coming out currently scheduled for mid-May that will propose differentiated dual enrollment as a logical addition to traditional state-level dual enrollment policies, and suggest answers to some key policy questions for each type of program, such as what it is, who may teach that course offering or experience, course delivery models, and funding considerations. So moving on to work-based learning, many people immediately think of internships when they hear work-based learning, but in fact there's a much broader set of experiences, such as service learning, school-based enterprises, co-ops, and youth apprenticeships, to name just a few, that can meaningfully expose students to the world of work. As many of you on the call know, there are many, many moving parts to high-quality work-based learning experiences. So the guiding principles I present here are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what state policy needs to take into consideration. Rhode Island's work-based learning guidance suggests these following work-based learning experiences or guiding posts. So for example, rigorous, meaning that experiences are skill-based and linked to measurable outcomes, relevant, as in tied to a student's interests, and including projects and tasks that someone in a real workplace would perform in a high-wage, high-demand industry in the States. They also suggest reflective, meaning that students reflect on the experience throughout and afterwards, and industry professionals meaningfully evaluate the student's experience as well. Interactive, and by this they mean that students interact with multiple industry professionals in various roles such as supervisors, mentors, advisors, or collaborators, and over an extended period of time. And then lastly, in the Rhode Island guidelines, this suggests that experiences be integrated, meaning that students apply what they've learned in the classroom, either in an academic or technical context, in their workplace experience. So just one more note, I'll be releasing a policy brief in July that will identify model state policy components for work-based learning. So this policy brief will identify a comprehensive set of policies states need to have in place in order to ensure broad access statewide to high-quality work-based learning programs aligned with state and regional workforce demands. Moving on to high school graduation requirements, for a number of years, career readiness has shown up in high school graduation requirements in one of two ways. So either students choose between CTE coursework and one or more other types of coursework to complete graduation requirements, or states have a CTE diploma or endorsement to the standard diploma. And while these approaches haven't gone away, we're seeing new ways the states are integrating career readiness and CTE into high school graduation requirements. These approaches include course substitutions, for example, allowing a CTE course to fulfill a graduation requirement in another content area, such as math or science. And in the last few years, states are increasingly allowing a computer science course to fulfill a math, science, or other core graduation requirement. States are also beefing up requirements for a CTE diploma or endorsement, or adding new CTE diplomas or endorsements. In many states, these requirements include going on completing a CTE course sequence to either earning an industry-recognized credential or achieving some other measure of career readiness. And we'll hear more about this approach from Nevada later on in this webinar. Some states are also integrating work-ready endorsements into graduation requirements. So these endorsements are available to students regardless of whether they're a CTE concentrator or a future English major. Ohio legislation passed in 2017 creates a, quote, Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal that can be affixed to the diploma and transcript. To earn the seal, students must have at least 3 mentors validate that the student has demonstrated 15 skills in at least 2 environments that may include school or the community or the workplace. Indiana is also currently piloting a work-ready endorsement. Some states are also requiring all students to earn an industry-recognized credential, and this is an approach that, for example, Virginia is taking on. And then last but not least, states are increasingly taking what I call a Carnegie Unit Plus approach, in which students are required to not just earn X number of Carnegie units to graduate, but achieve 1 or more external validations of college or career readiness. These might be earning an industry-recognized credential, a minimum score on work keys, minimum ACT or SAT score, or some other credential. So I'm happy to talk more about this approach in the Q&A section. And lastly, states are increasingly looking at college and career counseling. They're becoming increasingly aware that counseling, and I might add career awareness and exploration as well, are all critical to helping students make choices to put them on a trajectory to career readiness and success. So just a few questions here that policymakers can ask. One, many states already require students in 9th grade or earlier to map out the courses and other activities they'll engage in each year in order to be ready for the next step after high school. So states might ask themselves, how can requirements around individual graduation plans be enhanced to help students make choices to improve their career readiness and improve the transition from high school to post-secondary in the workplace? States can also ask, what supports can states provide counselors to help them be better informed about occupational needs in their region and the wages and its educational requirements associated with high-wage, high-skill, and high-demand careers? And then lastly, dedicated career counselors. How can states supplement the efforts of existing school counselors with industry-embedded mentors or dedicated career counselors, perhaps from a community college? So I realize I covered a lot of topics in a very short period of time here. Happy to go into more depth on any of these issues during Q&A. But with that, I'll hand it over to our next speaker, Dawn Burns from Nevada.
Good morning. I feel privileged to speak with you today on the great work that Nevada is doing to ensure that all students are graduating college and career ready. As the lead for the New Skills for Youth initiative, it is my job to find and leverage connections between all of the stakeholders that make up the education to workforce pipeline. I am sure you've heard the story about students in Nevada, especially in Reno and Las Vegas, making $60,000 to $70,000 parking cars right out of high school. At least that was a rumor 15 years ago. With the loss of jobs in the 2011 recession, our governor, Brian Sandoval, worked to see that a shift was made to diversify the Nevada economy. At that time, our unemployment rate was 14%. Today, it is 5%. Known for hospitality and tourism, mining, limited industries, and low post-secondary attainment, the state has added more than 198,000 jobs between 2011 and 2016. The state has worked to diversify the economy by bringing in industries focused on the new Nevada, such as advanced manufacturing, aerospace and engineering, healthcare, cybersecurity, and automation. Major in the development of our economic growth and building a strong workforce, Governor Sandoval created the Office of Workforce Innovation for a New Nevada, OWIN. Its purpose is to drive a skilled, diverse, and aligned workforce in Nevada by promoting cooperation and collaboration among all entities focused on workforce development. OWIN is responsible for our State Apprenticeship Council and the State Industry Sector Councils. Additionally, they provide, along with our Governor's Office of Economic Development, an annual InDemand Occupations Report. This report provides information on statewide and regional occupational projections. They also provide the statewide approved industry credential list. Please note the criteria on the slide. This list is an opportunity to help students and adults transitioning into the workforce with information on credentials that reflect the skill sets that Nevada employers are looking for in the jobs they're trying to fill. OWIN and GOED, which is the Governor's Office of Economic Development, provide the foundation for building partnerships with our employers statewide. The Nevada College and Career Readiness. Nevada is committed to improving student-to-workforce transitions and ensuring that all students have an equal opportunity to obtain career success. We feel that we have elevated the discussion on college and career readiness in Nevada. We have designated our high-demand, high-wage pathways, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, teaching and training due to the shortage of educators, and technologies. During our biennial legislative sessions, the following Senate and Assembly bills were created and passed to support the drive for statewide career readiness. Senate Bill 516 made the OWN a permanent agency. Assembly Bill 7, which is our College and Career Readiness bill that ties in the ESSA requirements and sets incentives for industry credentials and the College and Career Diploma, which I'll talk about in a minute. AB 482 provides the impetus for the school districts to ensure that they have used the InDemand occupation list in order to request CTE grant funds. Senate Bill 19 talks about dual enrollment and dual credit and building more opportunities between the community colleges and the secondary schools. Senate Bill 66 updated our work-based learning requirements. The responsibilities and the expectation for the work-based learning coordinator. Our College and Career Readiness Diploma. We're very excited to be rolling out our College and Career Readiness Diploma, freshly approved like last week. So these are the general requirements on the slide you will see, and then the foundation for the diploma was made from our advanced diploma requirements. In order to have a college and career diploma, you must have those original requirements and endorsements. You can have a college-ready endorsement. You'll see what those requirements are. You may have a career-ready endorsement, and you see what those requirements are. You may have both college and career-ready endorsements. ACT is a college-ready assessment. Nevada provides statewide to all 11th graders the opportunity to take the ACT. ACT Work Keys, or the ASVAB, is the Career Readiness Assessment, which is new this year, so we'll see how that's going to roll out. But there is incentive monies for school districts that have students that receive the College and Career Diploma. Lastly, we elevated the rigor of our standard diplomas. Soon to be approved, we've added a College and Career Ready Flex credit, 2 units that encompass CTE or additional academics. That's a snapshot of what's happening in Nevada.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Heath, and I'm the State Director for Career and Technical Education for Colorado. And very excited to share with you some different pieces of things we're doing in Colorado that tie definitely to some things that Dawn just mentioned, as well as Jennifer. So in Colorado, one of the founding foundations around why career and college readiness are so important to our state is that we have a leaky talent pipeline and some severe gaps within our traditional model of how we assume people go through their pathway, which is what the graphic is, their traditional quote-unquote way that people go through their lifetime in education. So we identified that if you had 100 Colorado ninth graders, and you can see the rest of the numbers on there, that only 77 of them actually graduate high school on time, and by that we mean the entire gamut of all the different reportings for graduation. 44 of those 77 enroll in college in the fall, and by college we mean all forms of post-secondary. 35 return for their second year. Of those 35, 13 still need one remedial course, which we all know remedial education is a big focus of redesign within most of our community colleges around the country to help students break the cycle of not earning credits and moving along their pathway. Of those 35 that return for a second year, 23 will complete college in 150% of the time. So an associate's degree, that would be 3 years. For a 4-year degree, that would be 6 years. Of those 23 that complete, only 18 enter employment directly after college. And the reason this is important is, what about those other 82 students? And that's where we as a state feel that our efforts around career and college readiness and career and technical education and work-based learning and other elements are helping to assist those 82 students that this traditional pathway is not working for. Within Colorado, our career and technical education model stems around academic and technical skills, so much to some of Jennifer's points around career and technical education programs, earning the credits required for graduation. So for example, the majority of our cosmetology programs not only earn licensure so that students can work in our state, they also earn applied chemistry credit so that students can work their way to graduation, as well as Jennifer mentioned computer science, but then also some different pieces around some of our health science programs as well. We have work-based learning as a required element, and we will get that back going with some later slides. And then we also require that students learn about how their role within leadership plays into the more larger picture of career and college readiness through their career and technical student organizations. None of those pieces can exist without the elements that are in the gray around the circle. And we're going to focus a little bit today on career development and programs of study. And so with our programs of study in particular, one thing that's really critical about that piece is when Jennifer was mentioning that one of the focuses in several states around legislation is that intentional pathway for a student. So what we did within our state, it's a little different because we actually have access to all CTE students. So we manage and support career and technical education for middle school programs, high school programs, and post-secondary programs. So in order to ensure that we have a thriving Colorado economy, what we try to do is connect all three of those levels together. So what you can see on your screen are our numbers of students that participate, and what you probably see within that also is that there's a bulge in the middle for high school. So what we've been intentional about this year is working on our programs of study where every service area college, which is outlined in statute, has been hosting their K-12 district partners. And we've been working on our programs of study for career and technical education programs as a continuum. So what does a student take in 7th and 8th grade that leads them to a high school program? What do they take within college to complete what they started in high school? We are a little bit unique against some of the research that Jennifer shared, where for our career and technical education concurrent enrollment programs, our overall concurrent enrollment, and if you just Google Colorado concurrent enrollment report, we have the 15, 16 numbers and some really cool breakdowns of demographics and other information. But 40% of all the courses taken in our state for concurrent enrollment are CTE classes, which is a little more than 10,000 students. So really excited about those pieces. But that's also because we require those connections to happen. So in order for a CTE program in secondary to earn funding, they have to have concurrent enrollment, an articulation agreement, or a service area partnership if a four-year institution makes more sense for the program, like in some of our business programs. And that has kind of been the catalyst to try to drive some of those associate completions and certificate completions while in high school. And just for a little bit of context, 103,000 students is about 40% of our overall high school population within career and technical education, which is interesting since I just said 40% of also the concurrent enrollment numbers are CTE, so that's pretty interesting comparison. So within work-based learning for career and college readiness in our state, one of the focuses we've also had is how do we work together? So our Office of Economic Development and our Department of Labor and Employment, but most importantly our main convener, which is our Colorado Workforce Development Council, which is a governor-appointed and industry-led group that helps us all work together interagency-wise, have branded what we call Talent Found, which is a landing place and a convening group so that people always know the right door to get to the information. So we're really excited to launch that and have all of our different talent development groups and workforce partnership groups in one location so that there's easy access for consumers. All together and throughout all of our agencies, we came together and had meaningful conversation around what does work-based learning look like in Colorado. So what is that spectrum and that continuum? So like Jennifer said, it's not just internship, it's not just apprenticeship, it's all these wonderful things that are listed here that gauge from what education leads, which is more learning about work. So a lot of the things we're talking about with career readiness today, about counseling, presentations, interviews, job site tours. And if you see in the blue in the bottom, how do we lean then and blend all the way over to where it's more business-led, which is our learning at work, which is more of our apprenticeship and on-the-job training. So within career and technical education, we require that some form of work-based learning has to occur in order to receive state and federal funding. And it can be anything along the spectrum of opportunity, and we're really excited to support more people with these pieces in their instruction. Also, like I said, around the edges, none of these things can exist without partnerships. And what we're really excited is that the Housing and Building Association of Colorado Springs has been very intentional about bringing industry partners into the classroom, assisting the teachers who might need a little bit more occupational experience to be able to issue industry-recognized credentials, as well as hosting students and actually taking on the financial burden of some of the liability pieces for their building and housing different people within industry to actually host students for internships. So again, work-based learning and embedding technical skills and academic skills and leadership leading to career and college readiness can't happen without partnerships, as well as if you look at the top two, I'd be remiss to not say the foundation of all of this is career development. And in the questions and answers, hoping to talk a lot more about that and the different pieces we're doing around meaningful career conversations. Some policies of note for career and technical education and career and college readiness within our state is we have career pathways legislation that identified our different key industries and how do we identify those roadmaps for students so that they know, as well as all adults and incumbent workers, the whole gamut of our state, so that Coloradans know their on-ramps and off-ramps to meaningful careers, but then what education is actually required for those careers and how do they advance themselves and where do industry-recognized credentials play into that. Also had some wonderful legislation sponsored and really supported by one of our key stakeholder groups around business and industry, Colorado Succeeds, and around industry-recognized credentials and career success, and that's the House Bill 161289 listed. And our school districts were able to apply for incentive funding for their students who sat for and passed industry-recognized credentials. And all of those, there was an approval process where they were tied to our Colorado Talent Pipeline report. So like Dawn mentioned in the work that they're doing in her state, we also have a report that identifies all of our key industries, our hot jobs, and what openings exist. And all the industry credentials that are earning incentive funding have to match to those. One thing that was really exciting for us as career and technical education was we had a change in our K-12 matriculation law. In the past, and I always say that so many people love to say, oh, guidance counselors, tell kids about CTE. In the past, schools were only judged on the four-year going rate of their students. So in 2015, we had legislation that came through, that 1170, that said, what about the other forms of post-secondary education? Why shouldn't schools earn credit and be recognized for students moving on to all forms of post-secondary? And for us in career and technical education, that's really been transformational because now certificate programs and associate's degrees and other forms of post-secondary are counting towards that matriculation rate, and it's really helped schools be more intentional with their CTE programming. As mentioned, we also have individual career and academic plans. And one thing that came out too to better support that is some legislation around informing students about what are the current jobs as well as what are current military options for them to be able to pursue tied to their individual career and academic plan as well as their pathways and identifications. So all of these pieces of legislation are tied to a wonderful document if you would like to Google it and check it out. It's a great read, the Colorado Talent Pipeline Report, which has appendices of all the industry-recognized credentials that we as a state support for incentive funding, as well as our top jobs and just some great research. One thing that I'm very proud of in our state is that we also have career and technical education counselor funding and training. So our counselors can earn for their district their state dollars for career and technical education just like a teacher does. Again, it's all about the time and effort around spending time with CTE students and talking about and having meaningful career conversations around their pathway. But we're also doing training in conjunction with our Colorado Association for School Counselors in several school districts, and it's been wonderful in helping support counselors in understanding their knowledge of career and technical education. So with that, thank you so much. All of our things are available also on our website, which is coloradostateplan.com. And now Nathan will talk to us about industry.
Actually, I think, Sarah, we're going to Kathryn next. So, Kathryn ZGS.
Sorry about that. Kathryn.
No problem.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Kathryn Zekus, and I'm the Senior Associate for Federal Policy at Advanced CTE. If you're not familiar with us, we represent the state leaders responsible for CTE at the K-12, post-secondary, and adult levels across the country, and you just heard from one of our members, actually, Sarah Heath. So glad that she's on the line today. But today I'll be covering how states are leveraging federal policy to advance their career readiness efforts. Unfortunately, I have to hop off a little early today, so my colleague Austin Estes, our Senior Policy Associate, will be hopping on in my place to answer some of your questions later on. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Many of the other panelists have mentioned how much CTE-related policy activity occurred last year, and I just wanted to highlight that it's actually 100 more policy actions than 2016, so lots of things happening across the country related to CTE and state policy land. But we think that one of the drivers behind that was related to what states included in their Every Student Succeeds Act plans. So we call that ESSA for short. If you're not familiar with ESSA, its primary focus is ensuring equity and supporting low-performing schools. In this past reauthorization, the law really focused on providing states increased flexibility and also opportunities to align supports across different systems, which include CTE and post-secondary and workforce development. So all states were required to submit their ESSA plans in 2017, and Advanced CTE and the Education Strategy Group actually looked at each of those plans to see how they addressed career readiness. And one of the main findings was that states use the accountability provisions as the most direct and most leveraged vehicle for incorporating career readiness in their plans. There were 35 states that included a career-focused measure in their high school accountability rating systems, and there are many examples of what this looks like. I'll just highlight one for now. In South Dakota, they have a college and career readiness indicator that's weighted at 25% of the high school accountability score, and that really looks at two dimensions, both assessment of readiness and progress toward a post-high school credential. But shifting gears a little bit to another federal policy that also has a lot of impact on career readiness is the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, or what we call Perkins for short. If you're not as familiar with Perkins, it's the federal law that really focuses on increasing access to high-quality CTE programs. It also looks at systems alignment and really hones in on improving CTE programs. It's also the largest investment in America's high schools, but states are really leveraging Perkins in a variety of ways to advance their career readiness efforts. Perkins is a very flexible law, and there are a lot of ways that states can leverage that investment that they receive from the federal government to advance their work. I'll just go over a few examples of ways that they're doing that. And one of the things that I'll note is that at Advanced CTE, we really think about states having a larger career readiness vision for their state and using federal policy as a tool in their toolbox to really advance that vision. So for example, in Washington, any application for Perkins funds that they receive needs to have alignment to their state strategic plan called Talent and Prosperity for All. So one way that they're leveraging Perkins funds to advance that broader vision. Some other examples of unique ways that states are leveraging that investment. In Nebraska, they use Perkins funds to launch what's called a revision initiative, and that process empowers local communities to work collaboratively and strategically to strengthen and improve their career pathways. Another example is in Montana. They used Perkins funds to expand dual credit course-taking opportunities in rural areas, and they actually doubled the number of small rural high schools offering dual credit. And with the specific funding stream that they used, they're actually able to shift that focus to address state-specific needs. So now they're actually looking at using that fund to provide more work-based learning experiences to students in rural areas. The next thing I want to note about Perkins is that it's actually due for reauthorization. It was due in 2012, and there have been a number of efforts over the past few years to start talking about reauthorization, but I'll just focus on the two that are most recent. In 2016 and 2017, the House of Representatives passed Perkins reauthorization bills. They're largely similar, the ones they passed in 2016 and 2017, but the themes across both those bills remain the same. There's really a focus on aligning Perkins to existing federal legislation, so you see alignment with the Every Student Succeeds Act and also the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act through things like aligned definitions and performance indicators. You also see a focus on really connecting CTE programs to the labor market. And as you've seen with ESSA, there's also a little bit of a shift to authority from the federal level to the state level and the state level to the local level. And right now, the Perkins reauthorization is awaiting action in the Senate. And from our perspective, there are a number of things that are really important to get right in this reauthorization. We have a full set of recommendations on our website. There's a screenshot there with the link. I'll just kind of focus on three here that we think are really critical. The first is an emphasis on high-quality CTE programs. And really what we mean there is that there's more specificity needed to define the elements that are necessary to ensuring high-quality programs. So we think that the law should emphasize strategies that improve alignment across secondary and post-secondary systems. We think that high-quality CTE programs should align to labor market needs. Things like that are what we're talking about when we think about high-quality CTE programs. A second area that we think is really important is strong accountability and data-driven decision-making. So CTE performance indicators should really provide the feedback necessary for program improvement and evaluation. We also think that that data should be leveraged to maximum effect. So really thinking about how to connect that data to planning decisions and about programs and how to spend funds on those programs. And last but not least, we think that the focus of the law, as I mentioned, is on CTE program improvement. And we think it's really critical for that emphasis to stay there on and really maintain a tight commitment to driving program improvement. But we also think that in order to do that, states need support and flexibility to really focus their time and effort there. That's what I have about Perkins reauthorization. Again, more information on our website. And then here's where you can find a number of things on our website if you're interested in keeping up with CTE federal policy updates. You can subscribe to our legislative updates email series. We also have a revamped federal policy page that has a lot of information about ESSA, Perkins, the Higher Education Act, and WIOA. We also have a lot of fact sheets on CTE and communications tools and resources on our website as well. And then last but not least, our resource center houses all of the reports that I linked to and mentioned today. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our next presenter, Nathan.
All right, thanks a lot. Just to give everyone here briefly our perspective as an industry standpoint, Crossland's a construction company, commercial construction. We're the 75th largest builder in the nation. And we've definitely, as a kind of an end user of the education system, we came to a realization about 10 years ago that, well, we really have to be more involved with the career readiness, the talent pipelines coming out of schools. We need to help in that effort if we expect to get what we need. So there's a lot of great stuff happening everywhere from the sounds of what's going on in this call, but for our own story, it looks like this. We have a talent, like an overall talent strategy to deal with people, but a lot of that's focused on what we do with them after they become employees through training and our retention efforts. But for this call, you know, what we do to attract the right fits is all about this career readiness, how industry gets involved at the school level, how we screen candidates, how we promote our jobs and our career pathways at the school level. It's key if we want to end up with what we need. So, but basically, this is no surprise. Everybody's in kind of a talent crisis right now, our company included. Our growth has been tremendous, as you can see by this chart, over the years. And with that growth, requires people. Well, the construction job openings have grown 30% from 12 to 2016. Employment's only grown 20. So we see basically this data everywhere that I'll just breeze through quickly here that promotes this crisis that we have. You know, the composition of the workforce is flipped in 65 years. In 1950, when there were 60% of the jobs that didn't require much skill, now those 60% of the jobs require creative thinking, you know, people that can get in and get work done, whatever you want to call it, blue collar, new collar, no collar. That's what we have right now. We've got, I'm in construction, but this can be probably applied to any industry right now. The pace of technology has been increasing so quickly. We need people that can think and reskill and upskill agilely. Training needs to meet that call. And schools, the efforts of CTE are kind of where all of that tone gets set. So it's really important. This has just completely shifted. The one thing that hasn't shifted that we'll see are the percentage of workers requiring a 4-year college degree. So that's stable. And we have no problems there. This is what's happening in construction. 5 people leave right now for only 1 person to replace them. That's whatever that is, the baby boomer retiring, people leaving our industry, 5 to 1. It's a bad thing, but when you look at construction, we as Crossland said, what's going on? This is construction's 47.5 per year on average. You got 401k, insurance, vacation, safer to work on construction site than drive to work. You know, these comparing industries, construction professionals make really great money. And also there's research that shows that, you know, construction workers are some of the happiest people in the workforce right now. So why nobody coming in to take these awesome jobs? And what we kind of came down to was we just don't attract enough new young people to our industry. That's a big problem for us. And like Sarah pointed out earlier, I kind of did my own could not be considered scientific research since I just used Google, but I found the National Center for Education Statistics, and I saw this cascading, you know, diminishing return on what's going on with our 18 to 24-year-olds in what this graph shows here. You know, 82 graduates, 53 in college, 24 graduate within 6 years, and 16 of those get a job requiring the degree they sought. And again, you know, Sarah's number was 82, mine's 84. That either one is a huge number. And it's not that there's this told us that there wasn't a talent shortage because there are people. There's tons of this millennial crowd, 18 to 24, 18 to 30. They're out there. They're just not connecting with us, you know, from our perspective. So we started looking at how can our pathways, how can we get involved in the schools to build out this vision of what it's going to take to attract some of this top talent. Top talent not being defined as 4-year graduates of college only. So we built pathways out. We worked out through tech and community colleges and apprenticeship programs and showed students, you know, basically from 5th grade on, how we can engage them and what all these different options look like. And we, you know, tried to educate counselors and schools along the way and get involved and sponsor construction tech programs in whatever way we can to kind of help change this perception. What that looked like for us, and this is kind of where the rubber hits the road from the CTE perspective with how Crossland got involved, is our Crossland connection. You know, we, through NCCR, which is the National Center for Construction Education and Research, we became an industry sponsor, a training sponsor, and started sponsoring that national portable credentialing curriculum at schools all around, starting in our home state of Kansas and then spreading out as we could, and convincing kind of pleading industry groups to take on that flag and sponsor and support those school programs with us, and it has. And we weren't the first, and we're not the last or the largest, but I don't want to paint that out. But the key there was to get in the schools and help raise that bar on the curriculum, the credentialing that our industry, specifically our company, finds valuable, and doing that through a variety of means, and getting into the school, presenting that positive image, keeping those relationships up with the students, with the instructors, with the teachers. We have folks that go into, to people's homes when their parents invite us and kind of explain really what the opportunities, what that CTE pathway really looks like at the end. And then we recruit. And this really, from my perspective, the most important part of this are the suite of tools that we landed on. The predictive index is one. It's a behavioral assessment that we can use to tell if this 18-year-old, really, if he says he wants to get in construction, if he wants to be a carpenter, we can give him this assessment and have a picture of who he is, what his personality is like, and say, you might think you want to be a carpenter, but you've really got a pattern that's more fitting for a heavy equipment operator or maybe an estimator. That can help us kind of zero in on those conversations. The judgment index gives us a baseline look at, common sense, which is invaluable in our industry, even more so, I would argue, than any specific training credential. And then the ACT work keys, we started using that heavily about 4 to 5 years ago. That's cognitively, we can identify who understands basic fractions. So we know, hey, if this kid gets a silver, we know we're not going to have to teach him basic fractions. We can teach him how to build buildings. So that's a really important screen-in tool for us. And then NCCR is kind of the bulwark that we've used for many years as the portable credential. We use that for our registered apprenticeship programs. It's just that baseline industry knowledge for construction that many students can get through their school programs. So that's been really helpful to us. This is kind of the pathway. Like we mentioned, 20% we're requiring college degrees. We have pathways for those 20%. We have entry-level management field engineer positions. We want college graduates. That's not a change, but the bulk of what we need, that 60%, we need to come right out of high school, right out of a tech program, and hit the ground running in our trades, in the field, putting work in place. So the intern program is basically that. It's that experiential learning. We try to stay with them for 4 years. We sell them the value. We have, $60,000 in these kids by the time we make them full-time offers. And we program their experience while they're with us. So we know at the end of that, we know what we're getting. But door number 2 is even more important to us. That is that high school to work craft program. We've developed what we call our 50-50 mentoring program. We get in the high schools, the tech schools, we do our screening, then we kind of dump those students right into full-time jobs and training. So we continue their education out in the field through OJT while they're putting work in place. We developed a pay ladder where we put our money where our mouth was, said, hey, if we're saying we recognize OSHA 10 credential, let's pay kids for it. If we say we recognize NCCR and work keys, let's pay for it. So these represent increases to base pay that students are offered that come to work for us if they, in high school, have gotten that NCCR level 1 card, if they've gotten OSHA 10, if they've kept their grades up, if they've got work keys silver. Now they're not making $13 an hour starting out, they're making $14, $15, or $16 an hour. So it shows them that, yes, what you do in high school does matter. And then we break out here just a longitudinal look at if you come out at 18 and you work your way up, you can basically have the value of almost $500,000 by the time you're 26 without student loan debt and so on. So not to diminish the value of college, but those are the pathways that we've designed, and they've really worked for us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you to all of our panelists. And at this point, I'd like to throw it back to Jennifer to begin the moderated discussion.
So I'd like to thank our panelists as well. I really appreciate all of their insights today. And Kathryn, since you need to run in a few minutes, I'll toss you the first question. You mentioned federal policy that are supporting states in certain ways. Some of our other speakers talked about advising efforts. can you talk for a minute about how federal policy can better support states in providing quality career advising?
Sure. We think that's really important, and we think that, especially in a Perkins reauthorization, there can really be a greater emphasis on things like career counseling and looking at individualized learning plans that follow students throughout their education career. So yes, we think that's really important. It needs to be emphasized. Also, currently in current law, there are some barriers to spending Perkins funds in the middle grades, and we'd love to see those lifted so that this career exploration can start in the middle grades, and then that career planning can just continue on from there.
Great, thank you so much. So moving on to Dawn and Sarah, can you talk for a minute about the sticking points for implementing career readiness efforts in your individual states? Were they particularly funding issues? Were they buy-in from parents or educators? Were they other issues? Dawn, would you like to speak to that for a moment first?
Sure. Basically, we're trying to work with shifts in the mindset. You know, a lot of times people think that young people are not capable of reaching toward these high-demand, high-wage positions. So a lot of the past inspirational messages that kids have gotten is that just get through high school, and that's a big enough challenge. We also have, so we're trying to shift that mindset. We also have the rural areas who don't even see the jobs we're talking about. We have parents that sometimes lack that understanding about the labor market and what the skill sets are needed. We have teacher training and employer engagement and commitments needs to be made on all those areas. And then we always have funding issues, you know, the money that we have, is it going to support what actually needs to be done? And I think switching the high school electives to actually talking about these are things you need out in the real world. That's it.
Okay. And I would just add, much to Dawn's points, I think for us what we've noticed is it's more of just a perception of work in general that is a huge issue. And how do we make people feel that their career is a very important thing to start self-discovering at a young age, because you spend the bulk of your life doing that. So since so many people talk really only and think about college, but what happens after college? And so many schools that we've visited, especially around some of your guidance efforts, it's, you know, let's look at what school will you be going to. And it's not necessarily 100% focused on like the major or what they would do after school with that degree or certificate. And so that's why we're hoping that we change that perception of work in general so that people start thinking about their career more so than anything else and where they want to go. Because as Nathan shared and I shared, only like 17% of students nationally are actually entering the four-year traditional route, or what we at least perceive as the traditional route, through post-secondary to career. And so how are we making sure that career readiness is a central focus that impacts the majority of our students throughout the continuum of their life from elementary to completion? And I think that sometimes people feel more comfortable talking about some different pieces besides like skills and abilities, and besides what students want to be able to do, and how do we map those out to career pathways. And so we're really excited. We're fortunate that we have a grant from the Siemens Foundation through the support of Advanced CTE, which Kathryn represents, to start targeting messaging and some fact sheets around careers for elementary, middle school, and high school parents and counselors, so they can see the multiple options that Nathan mentioned, and also the multiple opportunities within career and technical education, and how those experiences and even just the exploration of those experiences in elementary and middle can play into overall career readiness.
All right, thank you. So one last question for Kathryn, and also Nathan, I'd like to hear your response as well. Kathryn, do you feel like funding under Perkins should require coordination with local businesses? And then Nathan, from your perspective, how valuable is that coordination? So Kathryn, if you can give us your last couple of minutes, and maybe Austin can pick up where you leave off, and then Nathan following up on that experience how valuable that coordination is.
Hi, this is Austin Estes with Advanced CTE. Unfortunately, Kathryn had to step out for another call, so I can quickly jump in and provide an answer. So our recommendations for the new reauthorization of Perkins is that absolutely coordination with industry should be a priority, but that this is should kind of be left up to states to determine exactly how to engage local industry and business partners within their states. In practice, most states have a formalized structure for engaging local business partners through industry advisory committees who review and provide input on the curriculum and the design of different programs of study. And there are a lot of best practices from across the states, and that's a model that's been pretty effective. But it's kind of hard to have one specific uniform model that applies across all states because so many states have different approaches that have worked within their own context. So that's kind of our standpoint. Is it's absolutely critical, but states should have the flexibility to determine exactly how to build those relationships.
That makes sense. Nathan?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea to coordinate with local businesses on this. I don't know that many local businesses, at least on the small to mid-size, have the resources or time to commit. You know, Crossland and larger companies absolutely can help guide and steer some of those discussions on what's valuable and what's happening in the industry. But I don't. You end up maybe with a limited perspective or a more of a 30, 50,000 foot view than in reality what is happening in any given area. We see in the schools that we're in all the time, the schools are dealing very locally because the local businesses usually are the ones that are the immediate end users of the product of education. So I know that's happening. I just don't know that it's making its way all the way back to where it needs to.
All right, thank you. And from one of our listeners today, we've received another question for Nathan. From an industry perspective, you put into place a robust process for working with schools. What kind of barriers did you face, and how did you overcome them?
What we found is it wasn't, the schools open their arms typically to any industry that wants to help or offer any guidance or direction. We didn't have any barriers that way. I think sometimes the barriers for us were in the minutia of being an industry sponsor, in our case for NCCER, which is that construction credentialing organization. Great curriculum, great product. Just when the rubber hits the road to ask industry at a certain point, you know, we're in the business of building buildings, not, you know, oversight on auditing classroom files. But that would be, I'd say, the only barrier is taking that balance between the burden of the administrative and technical work of making sure things are done consistently and correctly in these schools to result in meaningful credentials, balancing that with the fact that they're businesses, they're kind of in go mode all the time in other aspects.
And one other question we received from one of the participants today, and it doesn't say it's for one individual, so feel free for anyone to chime in. How often are aptitudes being used to suggest recommendations for exploring career pathways? Is there anyone in particular who'd like to jump in first?
I'd like to know the answer to that myself.
Anyone?
So I think, this is Sarah, I think that a lot of that is kind of right now localized depending on the community and how comfortable people are talking about that. Because I think that just in my work in K-12, when you have a student and you're trying to talk to them about their aptitudes and abilities and skills and things of that nature, it's a really personalized conversation. And I think that a lot of our K-12 schools and And one thing that I know we're really cognizant of is just our school counselor to student ratio, and how if we really truly want that to happen in a meaningful way, then all teachers, all people that interact with these students on the daily basis need to be skilled in having meaningful career conversations, because we can't rely on school counselors alone, because there's just not enough time in the day with all the other things they have to do, from test prepping, scheduling, risk assessments, the social emotional issues that we all know are going on right now in our society. So I think that if we want to be more thoughtful and meaningful around that, we have to prepare every adult that interfaces with a student, including parents, on how to have those conversations.
Right. Dawn, actually, I'm going to just shift gears a little bit. You had briefly mentioned rural in your response to the earlier question about sticking points for implementing career readiness. I'm wondering if you can build out on that a little bit, what some of the particular rural challenges are in Nevada, and then Sarah or Nathan, if you'd like to jump in on rural issues in broadening career readiness goal or achieving career readiness goals and how you're addressing those. And then Nathan, feel free to jump in as well. And then I don't know, Austin, if you have anything to say from the federal perspective on that one. But Dawn, let's start with you.
Sure. In Nevada, 70% of students are educated in southern Nevada in the Clark County School District. So that leaves 30% through the rest of the state. Washoe County up north is the next largest district. Our concerns are, number one, the whole internet bandwidth. So in order to try to have some dual credit classes or AP classes, we have to make sure that our rural schools can get the bandwidth in order to share information and teachers. The other thing is they just don't have those industries that they see. So when you start talking about the high demand, high wage, they say, oh no, our town can't do that, or our kids can't do that. So we have to get to them and explain that we're, building student skill sets and building their opportunities so that they can get a job at a livable wage and have a career. A lot of times, even with the CTE programs, trying to have completers and follow a pathway becomes difficult because they may have one teacher. And so one teacher teaching something in CTE, and then the kids don't get a chance to take a sequence of courses. So we're looking at all of that, and we're going to be making some site visits, and we've developed a new CTE quality standard rubric that the State Department is going out and looking at what needs to happen to upgrade, all of the areas. So that's it.
That's great. Thank you.
And from a Colorado perspective, we have 178 school districts in our state. 148 of those, so that's 80% of the districts, are rural. However, they only comprise, kind of like what Dawn was saying, only 15% of our overall student population, since the bulk of our population lives in Denver and along the Front Range. But 79 of those districts actually have fewer than 500 kids in them. So a lot of our issues are similar to what Dawn was saying around broadband and some different access points. So I wanted just to talk about, though, like one of our shining star kind of champions of who has made kind of an impact. And so that is in our southwest corner, one of our old mining communities called Creed, Colorado. Recently had a change in superintendent structure, and Liz Richardson's her name, and she has done an amazing job of reaching out to the community and seeing who she has from a retired base, as well as who within the district has different career skills that they can share with the students, and how do we help those people along the teacher licensure route, as well as getting their, we have CTE credentials in our state where you have to have occupational experience to earn our access to our dollars. And so like the transportation director, who obviously has a background in automotive, is going to be teaching automotive classes. There is someone from the Department of Wildlife who's going to be doing some agriculture classes. They have a theater in town. They're going to be doing some different pieces around the creative careers. So I think for rural districts, for us, is we're trying to elevate some shining stars who have made an impact by reaching into their community and seeing who they have access to so they can bring those people in to work with their students. if they don't have broadband as a capability.
All right, thank you. Mason, did you have anything to add?
Not really. I think the rural, our challenge is the rural students historically for us have made the best kind of, they have the best work ethic, I guess, for lack of a better way to say that, than we get when we are in some of our major, our more urban areas. But the problem is, I guess, it's access to the technology or that those higher level resources. I don't know if they're aggregated into the urban centers in our markets or what, but the rural students who have the best work ethic that fit our traditional industry, with it shifting towards much more higher technological focused, BIM, 3D modeling, living buildings, they're missing a lot of that cutting edge technological education. I guess they don't have that in the rural areas, but baseline they make some of our best fits.
Yeah.
And this is Austin. I'll just jump in and add a couple points because we've actually done a little bit of work recently on the topic of rural CTE. We have a series of briefs that we've been publishing over the past couple months related to this subject. So one, there are a couple of funding opportunities through federal legislation. Perkins specifically allows states to set aside a reserve fund that can be used to target rural communities and rural populations. And a lot of states are also taking the lead in putting aside innovation funds and other programs to support local innovation. As Dawn and Sarah both mentioned, there are a lot of challenges that are unique to rural communities, such as recruiting industry partners, recruiting qualified instructors who can teach more than just one or two classes during the school day. But there are some states, South Dakota is one example where they've put a lot of money behind this workforce education grant program that's allowing kind of levels the playing field and gives a little bit of seed funding for local rural districts to come up with some creative, innovative ideas to serve their student population. So in some cases, some districts have been partnering together to establish mobile laboratories. So they've outfit tractor trailers with technical equipment and have been traveling around from school to school to give students an opportunity to experiment and to apply some of their learning hands-on. Then you've got some states like Louisiana that are using virtual conferencing technology to connect students with industry experts in the classroom. So they'll have different professionals phone in and give a guest lecture. They can judge different competitions and can even provide more long-term mentorship for students. So there is a lot of innovation that's happening at the local level, but it is very much a grassroots approach because so many of these challenges are unique to individual communities and individual states.
Right. Yeah, and if I could throw out one other state example, the Iowa Governor's STEM Advisory Council, some of it is CTE-oriented, some of it less so, but the State Advisory Council has done an amazing job of spreading STEM across the state, and I think a lot of the things that they've been doing are applicable to CTE programs more broadly. So if you go to iowastem.gov and then mouse over educators, you can see a list of programs that they support. I think it was Sarah who mentioned that equipping all people in a school building, including teachers, to provide some of that career counseling and advising is really important. Iowa's invested heavily in teacher externships, so over the summer teachers can get into industry and actually learn how math or science is being applied in the real world, and then come back and share that in the classroom and also provide the opportunity for real-world problem-based learning. And they found actually that female students, after a teacher's been involved in an externship, express more interest in STEM than their male counterparts, and they hypothesized that's because that contextualization is even more appealing to female students than male students. So any of those of you out there on the call interested in how to get more female students engaged in STEM. So with that, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and we haven't talked about the governor's role very much yet. Dawn and Sarah in particular, I'd love for you to touch on that. in many states, emphasizing career readiness is a paradigm shift. So to what extent was your governor's leadership important to making that change?
This is Dawn. Our governor, hugely important. He was the leader. He started with an executive order to establish the Office of Workforce Innovation, and then he worked with legislature on making that a permanent office, and then he was behind the support for those bills that we have, and then the funding piece was huge. The funding for CTE went from $4 million to $12.5 million, and that was to develop programs in the high-demand, high-wage areas. So we would not be this far without his leadership.
And this is Sarah, very similar, or our governor's leadership was critical and continues to be throughout all of these different pieces. And he, through executive order, created what's called a Business Experiential Learning Commission in our state, which has people from business and industry helping our state leaders and our different state agencies have a broader picture of what the needs of business and industry are and how do we make sure that we're working those competencies and different pieces into all of our programming across our state. And with that, he also has brought forward that all of our state agencies together have some common goals around making sure that all Coloradans have access to meaningful employment. And some examples of that are the work-based learning framework that I showed earlier that's cross-agency, collaborative, and we also do professional development together. But one thing that I think was really critical was his empowerment of everyone to also come together and have a common language so that when I say something, Department of Labor says the same thing, so we're all speaking to these different critical issues using the same vocabulary so we're not confusing business. Because educationalese, we have all of our different acronyms and things that we use. So how are we being more intentional partners by just using the same language has also been under his leadership.
Yeah, that's a really important point about language. And then just speaking more broadly about the language around career readiness, and this is a question for Austin as well, and also Dawn. Do you think it would be helpful to have common definitions and measures of career readiness across states, or do you feel like states should have some flexibility on this point?
This is Dawn. I think that what I'm finding is because we're all using some of the same resources like advanced CTE, information from ACTE, and we're all sharing all the time, we are using, some of the same language and vocabulary. I think probably states need to be able to make it their own, but I don't see that we've been talking about separate things.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Austin. I would just echo that. One thing that we saw through states' work around the Every Student Succeeds Act and developing their plans is that many of them decided to set pretty ambitious goals around career readiness and defined career readiness explicitly in their accountability systems. But those definitions vary a lot state to state and is very dependent on those states' individual priorities and how they choose to support students on their pathways to success after graduating from high school. Another consideration too, a lot of states are looking at industry credential attainment as a way to define career readiness at the high school level at least, and at the post-secondary level, and which credentials are valued in that system depends and should depend on the state. And that should be related to which industries have a large presence in the state, which credentials are prioritized by industry partners. So it's kind of hard to say that there is or should be a uniform definition for career readiness across all states.
Sure. Sarah, did you have anything to add, or?
No, I agree, and especially with the fact that a lot of people have really gone down the marathon path to getting this done, so they're far into they're planning and far into all the things that they've rolled out. And so I think that why in spirit we all think that commonality is wonderful. I think that all the work and effort they put behind already rolling out things would just kind of create some more confusion for the field, just because we know, there's so much initiative fatigue that our schools actually have constantly that we would never want to intentionally kind of roll back some great work that they're already doing.
Sure. Yeah, and Austin, you brought up a great point about credentials. And this is a question for you as well as Nathan, Dawn, Sarah. How can states help parents, students, and employers understand that whole credential landscape and make sense of which credentials have value in in-demand fields?
I mean, I think it's super important for states to be transparent about which credentials are valued and which ones, both in the, which ones, students can earn high school credit for, which ones they could articulate college credits for, but also which ones actually result in outcomes for students once they enter the workforce. I think that's super important. As far as specific strategies, I would actually defer to Dawn and Sarah to talk a little bit about what they've been doing in their states in terms of raising awareness and communicating and messaging these opportunities to students and parents.
And so this is, sorry. Okay, so with our legislation that passed the Career Success Pilot, so that's House Bill 15-1289, if you're interested in checking that out. And so I think a lot of it had to do with our business community also supporting the different pieces around how that was communicated. So Colorado Succeeds, which is a wonderful association for a lot of businesses within our state who are interested in empowering people to make educational change. And they've actually gone around the state and hosted workshops with our teachers as well as their own business members and other businesses to kind of talk about those pieces from an outside business perspective versus us as education. And then also the way that we incentivize through that bill, the industry recognized credentials, they all have to tie to our talent pipeline reports, so what are our hot jobs and what are our in-demand industries in our state. And so there's a list of those, and all of those were vetted by our trade associations in our state. So I think it's just that constant communication and collaboration between business and industry and the education partners to make sure that we're hearing all voices and that we're being intentional about how we roll out those materials instead of doing it and not rolling it out to the districts and supporting them and implementing them.
Yes, I agree with Sarah on all of those things. One of the things that happened to us here in Nevada is we've always had some type of credentials in some of the CTE programs, but we didn't have a way we didn't have accountability measures for that. So when the industry credential issue came up, everybody was kind of, okay, what do we do? Which ones are good? Which ones are, questionable? And how do we get reports and all that? So having the OWN office take charge of that, we have one source. So if the credential's not in the list, then, it's nice to have. But we have, our list is dynamic, so it's changing all the time. It's being updated. It has the cost of the credential, and we're going to roll that out more to the school districts, and there will be incentives connected to that. But we're just beginning with those industry credentials, so it'll be interesting to see how that rolls out and what our numbers are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned earlier in my comments about states that are doing this sort of Carnegie Unit Plus approach to graduation requirements, and I think Ohio is a really interesting example. Effective with this year's seniors, they're going to require students to complete X number of Carnegie Units plus one of 3 pathways, and one of those is earning an industry-recognized credential plus scoring at least 13 on the ACT work keys. And they've, for each of the career pathways in the state, they've identified what that industry recognized credential could be. So if you're in a manufacturing pathway, it could be getting the full set of points. They'll go by a point system for getting your welding certificate. Or you can get a smaller number of credentials that add up to those 12 points, like 1 point for an OSHA credential or certification. And so there's a really clear messaging to students and parents that what those credentials are and that they truly are of value within the state. It's not just every old credential that's out there. So then Nathan, talking about credentials a little bit more, did the state lead the way at all for your company in embracing credentials as a tool for hiring and retention?
Yeah, in Kansas, where we're headquartered, I've seen efforts happening there. They passed Kansas passed SB 155 a few years ago that provided incentives for students to get industry recognized credentials, and I think that's resulted in, I looked at the numbers before this webinar, but I think it was 7,000 plus credentials that have increased in the last few years as a result of that kind of shift in focus. So yeah, I see Kansas kind of meeting that call. In other states where we work, Arkansas, actually the state actually sponsors all of the credentialing programs for, at least in my industry in construction. So that really helped take a burden off of a lot of the industry as far as, like I mentioned earlier, that administrative side of making sure the programs are being run purely. But yeah, I see that.
Yeah, and Kansas is so interesting because the legislation actually requires the Department of Labor to go in annually and evaluate what are the credentials that are eligible for that CTE Dual Enrollment, the Senate Bill 155 you're talking about. So again, sending clear messages to students and parents about what credentials of value are. So just one last question, Nathan, I'm going to ask to you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to wrap up. As an employer, do you recommend that states incentivize more students to pursue an industry-recognized credential? And do you feel like it's made doing business and staffing easier for Crossland?
Do I recommend states incentivize a credential? I'm not sure. I guess, do you mean for school systems? For states to put a carrot out either to students or to schools and districts for more students to earn an industry-recognized credential. Gotcha, sure. Yeah, I think the focus needs to be there. I'm a big proponent in industry providing the incentive. That's at the end of the supply chain. We as industry should put our money where our mouth is, and show how, like Crossland has the pay ladder that we looked at. We need to do a better job as business, as the career outlets for all of these students in showing what the value is there. And I think those efforts would bear more fruit. They have for us. The wheels of the state move slowly, as they must, because it's such a giant machine. But I would almost say that if we could somehow galvanize more business and industry to get involved with the schools, or at least add some tangible proofs as to what students can walk into their companies and their industries and earn, and the pathways, the real pathways for career growth from the business side is what I would propose. I'm a proponent of.
Okay. Yeah, and Dawn or Sarah or Austin, did you want to add anything on to that?
This is Sarah, and I just wanted to say that was music to my ears, Nathan. And we always say that that's why apprenticeships work so well too, because students are invested, companies are invested, and so I think the same holds true for industry recognized credentials.
Great. Well, this is Lauren again at WGA, and I think that's an excellent note to end on. So I'd just like to thank everyone for attending the second webinar in the Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative webinar series. Thank you so much to Jennifer for moderating that discussion, and to all of our panelists for the wonderful insights that they brought and the experience that they brought to today's discussion. I think that was a really valuable conversation. I'd also like to thank the National Association of Home Builders again for sponsoring this webinar series, as well as all of the Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative sponsors that have been supporting our work throughout the year. I will be sending a wrap-up email later this week or early next week with a link to the webinar recording on YouTube and the summary of some of the key discussion points today. And I'll also include some information there on the upcoming webinars in this series. The next will be on March 21st, and it will take a closer look at rural workforce development challenges. So we'll be happy to have Austin back on for that webinar to talk about rural CTE in a little bit more depth. So if that was of interest to you this time, be sure to sign up for that next webinar. So thank you all very much for your time, and I hope to talk to you all again soon.